What's up, guys? We're back here to continue working on our teapot. We're doing this in little steps or stages until we basically have the entire teapot built. So if you recall, our first step or stage was to go ahead and make the body of the teapot. And then in the last video, I showed you how to go ahead and make the foot ring and attach it. So that's what I have here. This is the bottom of my teapot. That foot ring is now, I would say, leather hard, to the point that I can flip it over, I can rest it on it. It's not going to smash the foot ring, it's not going to damage it any. If you do want, you can take one of the little sponge pads and you can go ahead and you can rest it on that if you prefer to do that, just to make sure that it's not going to get damaged in any way. So I am going to go ahead and rest mine on that sponge pad to start with. So our next step in making our teapot is we are going to cut open the opening in the top of our teapot. So a couple things about the opening. You don't want it to be too small. If it's too small, then it's going to be a little difficult to get down inside to clean after you use it. In the same sense, we don't want it to be so large that it takes up the entire top surface of our teapot. And we have to remember that when we go ahead and we make the opening, we have to make a lid with a flange. So that means our lid has to be larger than what the opening is so it doesn't fall through inside. So if you make a really large opening, then that means your lid has to be even bigger. And that may not be aesthetically pleasing, in other words, a nice look to your teapot. So we want to kind of try some different tubes, some different lids, different sizes, and see what we think is going to give us a nice kind of in between, something that's going to give us a decent enough opening to be able to get inside and clean it, but yet something that's not going to be so large that it's going to look awkward or not look as nice. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and cut that opening. So what I've done is I've gone through an assortment of tubes. We have 4 different size tubes here in class. I've also gathered up different size lids, and I've basically been resting them on top of it and deciding what I think is going to be best. So I decided to go with this tube here, and I just felt like it gave me a good size opening, and then I decided to go with this lid to be the size of the actual lid that I'm going to make to cover the opening. I felt like it wasn't too large and it was a nice size. So those are the two options that I've chosen. So in order to cut this open, the first thing I'm going to do is take this tube. I'm going to go ahead and rest it on top. I'm going to kind of stand up and look at it from all the way around, whether you are doing the round teapot or whether you're doing a cylinder teapot like I am. If it's a cylinder teapot, you can kind of take a ruler and you can measure the distance to see that it's equal all the way around, or on 4 points opposite each sides, and see if it's the same distance. If you need to adjust it and slide it one way, then you can slide it until you get it to where it's pretty much equal all the way around. That way you know you have it in the center. Once you go ahead and you get it in the center, just hold this steady, take your needle tool, and go ahead and draw a line around it and trace it so that you know where you're going to be cutting open the top of your teapot body. Okay, so we've got that done. I'm going to set this aside for right now. So when you cut this, you want to cut with the X-Acto knife. It's going to give you a nicer, cleaner cut. Try not to cut with the needle tool. If this is leather hard and you are forcing it with a needle tool, you may bend the needle tool, you may snap the needle tool, and also you won't get as nice a cut. So we're just going to go ahead and take our X-Acto knife. We're going to go ahead and insert it in, and we're just going to try and keep that blade straight up and down. If you cut at an angle, you're going to end up with an angled cut, or what we call a beveled edge here. We want to try and keep this straight up and down. So once you put the knife in, you're going to drag it. Try not to saw with it. If you're sawing with it, you're going to get kind of rough, jagged cuts. And you can go really slow on this. You'll see, I don't go terribly fast. I want to make sure I get a nice steady cut. And so I just try to go slowly, little by little. And rather than me moving my hand all the way around, I tend to cut a certain section and then I actually turn the pot itself so that I'm kind of at the same angle. I just find like it's easier for me to get a straighter or better cut that way. It's just for me, what I've found over time works best for me. Now when you get to the very end where you're going to meet back up, this is probably going to fall through inside. It's okay if it does. Mine just fell in. So at this point, just carefully tilt it over and go ahead and get that piece and take it out. We don't need this anymore. We're not going to use it for anything. You can go ahead and recycle that, put it back in your bag of clay, soak it in some water first if you want. It'll soften up, that way you can reuse that clay. So there's my opening, okay? May not be exactly perfect, but it's pretty close to a nice round circle. So now at this point I'm going to go ahead and take my sponge and I'm going to sponge and clean up that opening. And sometimes you can just, depending on the size of the opening, just twist the sponge or just wrap it around the edge and keep working to smooth that out. Okay, so then the next thing I like to do is take the actual tube that we measured with, and I go ahead and make sure there's not any dried up rough clay on the outside of it. I go ahead and I stand it up here, and I just make sure that it drops all the way inside, and I'll kind of use it to wiggle and round off any of the edges where I made my cuts. Sometimes helps to make it more circular or just to smooth it out. Then I'll go back with my sponge one more time. Sometimes I'll run my finger under this inside lip on the other side, and that's just because sometimes when you cut it you get little fragments that drop down inside. So I'm just going to go ahead and sponge this a little bit more, try and get it as smooth and perfect as I can make it. Okay, so we've got it open, we've got that cut made, hopefully nice and round, perfect of a circle as we can get. So I'm going to set this aside for a moment and then gather up a slab, and we'll be ready to start making our lid with a flange. Alright guys, so we're ready to make our lid with a flange, and just to be clear, your lid needs to be bigger than the opening that you've cut in the top. Otherwise it will fall through, and your flange is the part that's going to hang down so that when you tilt the teapot your lid doesn't come tumbling out. So I want the flange to be at least an inch tall. If you want to go a little taller, that's up to you, but I want it to be at least an inch. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut open what we want to be our lid. So I was thinking I was going to use this size. And now that I'm looking at it, I almost feel like it's just a little bit smaller than what I want. So this tube was kind of the next size up. So it makes it, for me, a little bit larger lid, and I think I'm liking the look of that better. Now, if I find after I do this and I put it all together that I wish it were smaller, I can always cut it down. But if I go with the smaller one and I decide I don't like it, then I have to go through the whole process and rebuild another one. So I'm going to go ahead and go with the bigger one first, thinking that I can always trim it down. So I've got a little bit of slab here. I'm just going to take the needle tool. I'm going to trace around the tube and cut through it, and that's what's going to end up being my lid for the top of the teapot. So, okay. So I think this is going to be a better size for me in terms of the lid. I think I'm going to like that a little bit better than the smaller size. So I'm going to go ahead and set this aside for a moment. So now what I want to do is I want to build the flange. And basically building the flange is just like what we did in the last step in terms of making a foot ring. It's just going to be taller instead of a ½ inch, it's going to be a full inch. So I've got my slab here, I've cut one side straight. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure in off of my straight side 1 full inch. And I'm going to make a mark in 2 or 3 places to line up on so that I get a strip of clay that is 1 full inch. Alright, so at this point I need to find a tube or lid to wrap this around that by the time I wrap around it and I add the thickness of the clay, it's still going to drop down inside here. If it fits a little snug after we build it, then we can basically sponge it. And as you sponge it, it's actually removing a little bit of clay. And so you sponge it until it fits in there nicely. It may turn out that you won't need to sponge it at all other than to just smooth it out, and it's going to drop in there perfect as it is. So found this tube. It's our smallest tube. I'm going to give that a shot. I think it's going to work out to be what I need. Like I say, if it turns out to be a little snug, I can do one of 2 things. I can sponge the flange till it removes some clay, or I can sponge my opening until it removes some clay from there and it makes it a little bigger and the flange will fit in. So I'm going to wrap this around here first. Like I say, it's just like what we did the other day, but with a larger piece of clay. Okay guys, it's been about 15-20 minutes waiting for this to get a little bit drier so I can remove it off of here and not alter the shape on it. So in the meantime, what I've done is I've taken the original tube that I used to trace around to cut my opening, and I've taken my lid that I cut out a few minutes ago, and I've put that tube in the center and I've traced around it. That's going to let me know that I need my flange to stand up inside that traced circle so that it'll fit down inside the hole that we've cut out. If it turns out it's a little too snug, then like I said, I can either sponge a little extra on this to remove clay, or I can trim a little bit and shave a little bit off the inside of the opening and sponge that to remove clay so that the two will fit in nicely. So I've already traced that and cross-hatched it while I was waiting, just to prep it for joining. So now at this point, I'm going to carefully slide the tube out of here, and I'm going to take away the paper towel. And so now I'm all set to cross-hatch and slip this on here. So as I've said before, look up both sides, whichever side you think is your nicer side, make that the upside that's going to be seen by people or by yourself. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cross-hatch this section and prep it so that it's all set to join. Okay, so we've got our lid with our flange built onto it, and at this point it's pretty soft and it's fairly wet. So what I'm going to do is just kind of let it hang out and dry at this point. As it dries, it should shrink a little bit, and it'll shrink to the same moistness level as what our actual teapot body is. And at that point, I'll turn it over and I'll test it and see if it actually fits. If it turns out that it's a little snug, like I said, then what I'll be doing is sponging this inside section just over and over, because each time you sponge it, it's removing some clay. And I will just sponge it, check it, until I get it to be the exact fit that I want, so that it fits on there nicely. Now, I don't want it to be super crazy snug tight, but I also don't want it loose that it's rattling all over the place. So somewhere right in between there. Okay, so that's the next step. Like I say, I'm just going to let that sit there and hang out and dry. Once it gets leather hard, then I'll be able to check it a little bit further. So if I put it on there right now after sponging it, because it's so wet, it will stick, and then I'll have a terrible time trying to get it out of there. So that's it for today, and I will see you guys in the next video when we talk about making spouts and attaching our spout.